Chicago is a city of many smaller cities, bisected every which way you can imagine. But one thing that both bisects and links the city is the Emerald Necklace, a series of parks spanning across the west and south sides that all feature man-made lagoons and are connected by a series of tree-lined boulevards. These parks were developed in the late 1800s based off of designs by Frederick Law Olmsted, and were designed to give weary factory workers a respite from the harsh and polluted urban neighborhoods and workplaces that they occupied. Although much of Chicago's heavy industry is gone, these parks continue to provide sanctuary and respite for Chicagoans of all descriptions. But they're not completely free from the problems that plague the city, and at times the tensions around gentrification can be felt acutely in these spaces. I've been fishing in these parks since my high school days, as fishing is prohibited in most waters of my suburban hometown of Evanston, and I've seen the changes playing out elsewhere in the city in these parks. I guess I'll take you through each and explain. The first of the green necklace is Humboldt Park, which lies on the west side about 6 miles from downtown. When I first began fishing here, I was always one of several people doing so. Fish have been stocked in the park since the 1800s, most recently by a group of neighborhood residents who formed a fishing society, with carp and bass being the main targets. But in revisiting this park recently, I began to increasingly hear the same dreaded question I hear while fishing along Lake Michigan and the Chicago Riverwalk in some of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. Are there fish in there? Over and over and over again. It's a seemingly innocuous question, but what it reveals to me is both an ignorance of local history and a deeply unsettling attitude towards the natural areas found within the city. Many wealthy people that I've observed in both my hometown and the city view nature not as something that is all around us, but as a faraway, pristine, untouched place, something you drive to Michigan or Wisconsin to see. They don't go birding or hiking, or especially not fishing regularly, but as a vacation activity a couple times a year. And as such, they don't see these waterways for the living, breathing ecosystems teeming with wildlife that they really are, but rather as simply a pretty piece of architecture to visually take in the same they would the skyscrapers of downtown. There is a distinctly noticeable air of superiority over those who choose to engage with these places in a more direct and consumptive way, and I think this clash exemplifies what is going on in the city on a broader scale. Humboldt Park is located in a rapidly gentrifying area of the city, which has seen property values increase several times over the past few years, threatening to displace longtime residents. Humboldt Park is home to Chicago's largest Puerto Rican community, a community that has been pushed westward by rising rent prices for decades, from Lincoln Park to Wicker Park, into Logan Square and Humboldt Park, where they are again being priced out. This is incredibly apparent in the park, where police presence has increased drastically, and tensions between old and new residents can be seen in both subtle ways and as drastic of ways, as people calling the police on neighbors for playing music outside, a practice that has been a neighborhood tradition for decades. Further south, we come to Garfield Park. Garfield Park's conservatory is a renowned and highly popular landmark in the city. The rest of the park, which lies across the Green Line tracks from it, is not. It's one of the most relatively empty parks I've been to in the city, and one of the calmest. Far fewer people ask questions, and when they do, they're usually other anglers. It's hard to say what will happen with the surrounding area. As of now, the community areas of West and East Garfield Park rank as the first and third most violent areas in the city. This doesn't seem to spill into the park all that much, although in 2015 the dismembered remains of a 2-year-old child were found in the lagoon. As development and gentrification push aggressively westward, Garfield Park's fate remains to be seen. Rent prices are increasing. I have some hope that COVID will slow down displacement, but with the south and west side seeing the most deaths and construction continuing along, I'm losing my optimism. Next, we come to Douglas Park in North Lawndale. The lagoon is muddy, its banks are overgrown, and there is a constant stream of sirens heading towards Mount Sinai Hospital down the street. But Douglas provided me with the most consistent carp bite of all the parks. While Lawndale remains for the moment a highly impoverished community hit hard by gang violence, Douglas Park's yearly hosting of Riot Fest, the construction of a new brewery and movie studio nearby, and rising rent prices in surrounding neighborhoods have spurred fear of displacement for its residents. Next down the boulevard on the southwest side is McKinley Park, which features possibly the most beautifully landscaped of all the lagoons. A paved trail wraps around a relatively clear lagoon dotted with islands and teeming with birds. It was the second most crowded, only behind Humboldt, but it was full of cheerful families maintaining appropriate distance. Fishing was slow, but I know there's plenty to be caught. The neighborhood around McKinley Park may see some increase in property values as neighboring Bridgeport becomes more expensive, but as of now it remains a stable, diverse, working-class community. Next up, Sherman Park, the exception here, and the one that will probably stay the same for a long time. It's located on the border of Back of the Yards and West Englewood, two neighborhoods that are impoverished, have reputations for being extremely unsafe, and are too far from the lakefront, airports, tourist attractions, and other more desirable neighborhoods to see any expansive development in the near future. Sherman Park has served as an oasis in this area for decades, historically for those employed in the infamous Union stockyards, and now for residents of the surrounding communities. While there have been bodies found in the lagoon, I found it to be quite tranquil. It felt among the most wild of the lagoons, with much of its shoreline being overgrown with native plants. It also finally provided me with the first carp I've ever captured on video. It might be my new favorite park in the city. For most of my suburban peers, as well as many in more affluent parts of the city, their only context of the surrounding communities is Upton Sinclair's The Jungle and the music of Chief Keef, and they would never dare step foot in the area. For as often as Chicago's violence is brought up, it's shockingly misunderstood. I won't even begin to claim any expertise on the subject, but what I can say from research is that it's highly concentrated and interpersonal, and what I can say from experience is that it poses little risk to outsiders visiting parks and businesses. In fact, you probably have a higher chance of being victimized in much of the North Side or even downtown. This is one of the strangest things to me about the mindset many people have towards these South and West Side neighborhoods, is that they view them solely through their problems, which are admittedly severe, but refuse to see them as real communities filled with normal people just trying to live their lives. Lastly, we come to Washington and Jackson Park, which I'll address as one since they're closely connected, and because Jackson Park is currently closed. These two parks and the connecting Midway plazas serve, in effect, to wall off Hyde Park and the University of Chicago from the surrounding neighborhoods of Washington Park, Woodlawn, and South Shore. The lagoons in the park have declined in recent years and fishing is poor, but they remain incredible habitats for rare birds and mammals within an otherwise highly urbanized environment. The stark difference in the surrounding communities can often be observed here. During my brief visit to Washington Park, I saw a group of people birding and overheard another group of people listing off gas stations they wouldn't go to because of shootings. Washington Park was to be the site of the Olympic Stadium, which would have destroyed some of its facilities. A similar threat now looms over Jackson Park, which is controversially slated to be the future home of the Obama Presidential Library, a decision that has also sparked fears of rapid gentrification in Woodlawn. It appears the writing is on the wall as rent prices continue to rise in Hyde Park and UChicago pushes south of the Midway. Residents of Washington Park and South Shore might hold on longer. My parents lived in Hyde Park from the time of their marriage in 1990 until a few months after my brother was born in 1997, relocating to Evanston because of the schools. My dad and I visit a few times a year, and every time he points out new apartment complexes and shops, as well as neighborhood institutions from his time that have long since closed down. My parents don't own a home in Evanston, nor have they ever owned one anywhere, but my dad says even if they wanted to move back to the city, their old apartment is far too expensive now. It's both odd and sad how Chicago's suburbs have become more affordable in many cases than the city itself. And yet, conversely, one of the lesser discussed problems of gentrification is how it homogenizes once vibrant and diverse urban neighborhoods into ones that feel suburban in character, filled with wealth and chain stores. I intend to keep fishing along the Emerald Necklace for as long as it's allowed, and I hope that as the surrounding neighborhoods change and develop, they do so to everyone's benefit. But whatever happens, I hope these parks continue to be a refuge.